laws of stoichiometry, or you can call it stoichiometric laws. Stoichiometric laws. Now, did I introduce this term stoichiometry to you? Did I tell you what stoichiometry means? Metry always means measurement. Metry as a suffix here is always going to mean measurement. Now, stoichiometry is going to be the general group. Stoichiometry is going to be the general group where we'll be talking of the topics in physical chemistry. We're going to do a lot of calculations and measurements. The very basic calculations and measurements in physical chemistry, all of it is going to fall under stoichiometry. And in all likelihood, this is going to be our talking point for the first few classes of the session. Some very basic laws of stoichiometry. First being the one which I guess all of you know, you have been knowing since quite some time, and that is law of conservation of mass. Law of conservation of mass, or indestructibility of matter. Anyone would want to state this for me? Conservation of mass. Mass cannot be created nor destroyed. That's for energy. It changes from one form to another. So, conservation of mass. Although now later on, you know that this law eventually becomes you have law of conservation of mass, then you have law of conservation of energy, and eventually there is law of conservation of mass and energy. Einstein gave you this form which was E is equal to mc square. So later on you know that mass and energy are interconvertible. So eventually it's going to take the form of law of conservation of mass and energy. But you know this since ages. You know this since like ages that mass can neither be created nor destroyed. Few cases where apparently you will feel that mass is increasing or decreasing. Apparently you will feel that mass is increasing or decreasing. Rusting of iron. Rusting of iron. You will apparently believe that the mass is increasing. Mass is increasing in presence of moisture and oxygen. Rusting occurs. You know, rust is a hydrated oxide of iron. So that's going to add to the mass of iron. An element magnesium. You burn it in an atmosphere of oxygen. See, when I say burn an element, obviously I'm talking of its combustion. Burning an element is as well as making it react with oxygen to form its oxide most of the times. So you are burning magnesium to get magnesium oxide, although you even get magnesium nitride. Magnesium reacts with nitrogen as well for the time being. Suppose ribbon का form में होता है, magnesium ribbon, you call it magnesium ribbon because it's in form of a ribbon. This is a white powder. Magnesium oxide is a white powder. You will see a given mass of magnesium is giving you a given mass of magnesium oxide, and you will see that the mass of magnesium oxide is more than the mass of magnesium you burnt. Fine. So apparently you will feel that there are chemical changes, there are chemical processes in which the mass is increasing. Later on you obviously know that once iron is getting rusted, it's moisture and oxygen which is getting associated with it. Yes or no? So the combined mass of this piece of iron which has rusted is going to be equal to the mass of pure iron you started with. You know one fact, pure iron doesn't rust. You know that? If iron is very pure now with no impurity. How many of you knew this? If iron is absolutely pure, it will not rust. Anyways, so the mass of iron and the mass of oxygen and moisture together is going to be the mass of iron which has rusted. Similarly, when magnesium becomes magnesium oxide on burning, it has obviously got this oxygen atmospheric. It has got this atmospheric oxygen, and if you add the mass of magnesium in the form of a ribbon and the oxygen atmospheric, the combined mass will be equal to the mass of magnesium oxide. Now, although they look like so elementary laws, like law of conservation of mass, you don't expect to be taught in class 11, because you are like knowing this law since class 2, 3, 4, you know about mass is always going to be conserved. But there must have been a time when this would have been enunciated for the first time. There must have been a pioneering effort. There must have been one man who would have first of all said this or conceived this. He was Lavoisier. And what he did was, because otherwise people obviously were used to changes. People were used to changes where mass was getting increased or decreased. All right. He did a very simple thing. He had a tube. He had a tube in which, so he kept a metal. Could be a metal, tin or iron, a metal, and obviously it was filled with air or oxygen, and he heated it. He heated this. Fine. Now obviously once he heated this piece of metal containing air, it would react with oxygen, forming oxide. Now the color, the property, the behavior of the metal and the metallic oxide will be completely different. So obviously you would see a chemical change, you would see a metal becoming metal oxide, and as I said, apparently there would be an increase in mass. You would feel there is an increase in mass. This was certainly, now it's going to look very elementary and simple, but realize you have to respect this, because this has to be the pioneering effort. First of all, he did this in a closed tube, he heated it, a metal in presence of air. Now the metal becoming its oxide, showing a change in properties. So chemical change was seen, observed. He weighed this before heating it, and then he weighed it after heating it. Once the oxide was formed, he allowed the system to cool down. Again he took the weight, and he found that the two weights were same. The two weights were same. So he figured out that the mass of oxygen and the mass of the metal is certainly equal to the mass of the oxide. You understand me? There was a very famous candle balance experiment conducted, where, see, I'm not very good at drawing diagrams, so don't mind the quality of the figure which I am going to draw for you. And most of the times, like, I guess you understand, this is a Bunsen burner. All right. Or in the worst case now, I'm going to label them. So it's a burner. Fine. And I don't know whether I'll be able to draw this or not. Still, let this be two pans of a common balance. Okay? Common balance, where I've tried to balance two tubes. There are two tubes. Now one of the tubes is, say, having a candle. There is a candle. This is the flame of the candle. All right. And there are perforations here at the bottom of this tube. There are perforations. There are gaps which will allow air to get in, Now initially I have not lighted the candle. So the candle is not lighted, and I have balanced the setup, the tube, with a few weights here. I have balanced it. Fine. So it's a balance where I have balanced this system, this tube, with some weights. Now I light the candle using a matchstick. I light this candle. I'll draw the flame better this time. So I light the candle, And in the tube I have a section, which contains two compounds, which contains two chemicals. One is calcium oxide, another one is NaOH. Now calcium oxide, what does it absorb? What is it very good at absorbing? Calcium oxide absorbs water. Obviously, it's a dehydrating agent. You know, it's called quicklime as well. You know, the process is very exothermic. You might see it. Matlab, Hindi mein it's called chuna. You add water to it, and you'll see it's a very exothermic process. Whatever is the case, it's calcium oxide plus water becoming calcium hydroxide. So it's a very good absorbent of water. NaOH is an absorbent of carbon dioxide. A caustic alkali, caustic soda, caustic potash is an absorbent of carbon dioxide, which will convert NaOH plus carbon dioxide will give you sodium carbonate. So it's packed with two chemicals, calcium oxide and NaOH, where calcium oxide is going to absorb water and NaOH is going to absorb carbon dioxide. Now you know, this is a normal candle made of wax. Wax is a hydrocarbon. Hydrocarbon contains carbon and hydrogen. If you light this candle, burning of wax will be burning of a hydrocarbon producing carbon dioxide and water. Now carbon dioxide and water both will be absorbed in this segment. Alright. After some time, this candle would have burnt completely. And once you see the candle burning completely, you would expect this balance, the right pan to move down or the left pan to move down. Ideally you will feel that if this candle is melting away, the mass is decreasing, and if the mass is decreasing, this pan should move down. And to your surprise, you would see that as the candle is burning, this pan containing the setup is moving down. Now see what's happening. The entire hydrocarbon is getting converted into carbon dioxide and water. None of the mass is gone. None of the mass is gone because the entire mass is absorbed here. So the entire hydrocarbon is getting converted to carbon dioxide plus water. Alright? So the mass of hydrocarbon is not lost because carbon dioxide and water is being absorbed. Plus, in the process of burning, it's using oxygen, yes or no? And where is this oxygen coming from? This oxygen is coming from these perforations. So you see the candle melting and gaining mass. Again, now you could easily relate to this, but 300 years back or even 400 years back, this must have been a very interesting experiment where candle is melting away and the mass is increasing. Now this also proves law of conservation of mass, that the total mass of the hydrocarbon plus the mass of oxygen is equal to the mass of carbon dioxide in water form. Akash, it's following me? Everyone else? And that is what is letting this pang of balance move down. Fair enough?
But how he experimented, how he did this experiment, because up from above that glass beaker is closed to open, is closed.
Yes?
The beaker in which the candle it is.
Alright. It has a lead. I'm labeling it. It has a lead which can be closed and opened. That's not an issue.
The CaO is in gaseous form.
No, it's in solid form.
So it is
There is a setup where in a segment we have put particles of calcium oxide and NaOH in solid form. Both of them can be kept in solid form. Alright? So the candle melting, but the mass is getting getting increased. There was this man, Landolt. Again, a very famous experiment which is called Landolt's experiment. Now, instead of complicated setup, he did a very simple thing. What he did was, you have tubes like this. This looks like, to some extent it looks like an alphabet H. So it's also called an H tube. A tube like this is called an H tube. Now, in this particular part of the tube, I have a particular chemical, and again, this half of the tube I have filled with another chemical. Okay. Very simple setup. I know the two chemicals are going to react. So I'll just tilt the tube. Suppose one of the solutions is lead nitrate. Another solution is say Ki. In the process of solving questions now, in the process of writing reactions, maybe every class gradually I'll be telling you about a few informations, and it's again something which is going to gradually increase. So let's begin in a way that let me tell you that all nitrates are soluble. Nitrates are easily soluble. Nitrates are always soluble. So many times now when you have to do a wet test, when you are looking to prepare a precipitate, have you done anything in your chemistry lab till date? I mean, a test tube, you have tried to get a precipitate. Have you ever thought that to get a precipitate, you should always start with two clear solutions? Have you ever thought about this? But you'll never want to get a precipitate from a precipitate. So most of the times when you are willing to have a test and you want to see a yellow colored precipitate or a red colored precipitate, so many times you've added two clear solutions. And I don't know whether you have noticed this or not. So many equations were nitrates. So many times you have used nitrates to get precipitates. You have very seldom used sulfates to get precipitates. I don't know whether you have again taken a note of it or not, that nitrates are always soluble and sulfates are seldom soluble. They are generally precipitates. So if you are willing for a precipitate like lead iodide here, lead iodide is going to be a precipitate. Lead iodide is going to be a precipitate plus potassium nitrate. I've just balanced this equation, lead nitrate plus potassium iodide forming lead iodide and KNO3. This happens to be a yellow precipitate. You'll want a precipitate for confirming that a chemical change has occurred. You'll see a visible change, no? Change in color, a precipitate formed, a particularly typical gas coming out. Will always be the preferred reactions. It's going to be easy to confirm that a reaction has occurred there. Alright, so one of them contains lead nitrate, another contains Ki. You just tilt the H tube, Landauer's experiment. The two halves contain two different chemicals. You just tilt it, you see a precipitate in one of the pangs, in one of the halves of the tube. You know a chemical change has occurred, you know this chemical reaction has occurred. You weigh it before and after the experiment, you weigh it before the and after the change, the mass remains same. Simplest way of confirming conservation of mass. Yes or no? This has to be the simplest way of explaining conservation of mass. Just tilt a system like this, weigh it before and after the change, you see the mass is same, you know matter cannot be created or destroyed. Now, after this conservation of mass, second law say which we are going to know is mass of constant proportion. Mass of constant proportion or law of constant proportion. Constant proportion or constant composition. This law states that a given compound containing given elements, a given compound containing given elements, a given compound containing given elements will always have the same composition of elements will always have a given compound containing given elements, will always have the same composition of elements irrespective of its source. Irrespective of its source. Irrespective of its source. So whichever way you use to prepare the compound, the ratio of the masses or the composition, the relative composition of its elements is always going to remain the same. Now, again, various ways of proving it. You can have, say, a compound like magnesium oxide obtained in so many ways. You can have magnesium burning with oxygen to form magnesium oxide. Maybe you can have magnesium carbonate heated to give you magnesium oxide plus carbon dioxide. Maybe you can have magnesium nitrate heated to form magnesium oxide plus nitrogen dioxide. Irrespective of the way you have got magnesium oxide, irrespective of the way you have got magnesium oxide, you see that the mass ratio of magnesium and oxygen, the mass ratio of magnesium and oxygen is going to remain the same. So irrespective of the source, the composition of the molecule containing given elements is always going to remain constant. This is called law of constant composition or law of constant proportions. You get copper oxide, suppose you get copper oxide in any of the ways. You're heating copper carbonate, getting copper oxide, other ways of getting copper oxide as well. So you have say prepared copper oxide in 3 ways. In 3 ways you have prepared copper oxide, and now you are looking for the composition of copper and oxygen in copper oxide obtained in all the 3 ways. 3 different samples of copper oxide obtained in 3 different ways. Now, for a given sample of copper oxide, you pass hydrogen in gaseous form. Copper oxide will be reduced to copper and water. Now again, you have, I'm talking of some very basic, simple experimental setups. You have ways of weighing copper oxide. Suppose the mass of copper oxide is m1 gram of copper oxide. And again, you have ways of weighing copper left. It's m2. So every time m1 minus m2 will tell you the weight or mass of oxygen. And again, m2 upon m1 minus m2 will tell you the composition or the ratio of the masses of copper and oxygen. You can very easily do this. So have copper oxide formed in different ways. All the samples of copper oxide reduced to copper, have these weights measured and try to find this ratio. This ratio will be constant every time. You understand me? This ratio will be constant every time. The composition of copper and oxygen will be constant. The composition of water, H2O. Now you pick water from different sources, different water bodies. You might even want to prepare water in a test tube. Chemically prepare water, or pick water from any of the seas or any of the water bodies. If it's pure water, you'll see the mass ratio of hydrogen and oxygen is going to remain constant. The mass ratio of hydrogen and oxygen is going to remain constant. This is law of constant composition or proportion. Although now there might be a few limitations of this law. Now, the limitations of this law might be out of isotopes. You know about isotopes? So along with H2O, you have D2O as well. D2O, D is the isotope of hydrogen, which is deuterium. Hydrogen is normal protium H11, D is going to be at D12. So when it comes between H2O and D2O, obviously there will be difference in the mass of, or the composition is going to vary. The composition is going to vary. So isotopes isotopes might make these experimental observations go wrong, but believe me, if the problem of isotopes is sorted out, if it's pure H2O every time, तो पैसिफिक ओशन से लो चाहे अटलांटिक ओशन से लो, हाइड्रोजन और ऑक्सीजन का मास रेशियो इज ऑलवेज गोइंग टू रिमेन कांस्टेंट. ऑलराइट, next one has to be law of, the reverse of this law is not true though. The reverse of this law is not true. Realize the actual law is that the same element, the same molecule containing the same elements will always have the same ratio of the different elements. The reverse of this might sound like the same elements in the same ratio of weights would give you the same compound. The reverse of this law would sound like the same elements in the same ratio would give you the same compound. Now let me tell you about two molecules. C2H5OH, who would name this? Ethanol, alcohol. And CH3OCH3. Although I'm not expecting you to name these compounds, we'll see them much later on. They are organic compounds. Still, anyone? Dimethyl ether. Dimethyl ether. Ethanol, ethyl alcohol, one of the most highly prepared and consumed organic compound by human civilization. And ether is so different. CH3O CH3 is completely different from C2H5OH, ethanol. It's going to be in liquid form. It will dissolve in water. You know, it's going to dissolve in water. It's going to dissolve in cold drinks. It's going to dissolve in soda. It's going to dissolve in, because of hydrogen bonding. There will be no hydrogen bonding here. So this will not dissolve in water. It will be in liquid form. It will be in gaseous form. Read out the formula. It's C2H6O in both the cases. It's C2H6O in both the cases. So I can claim that when it comes to ethanol, ethanol prepared in different ways will have the ratio of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen constant, but I can never say that the ratio of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen constant is always going to lead me to the same compound, because in both cases the ratio of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen is same. I hope all of you are following my language, that the same compound will have the composition constant irrespective of its source, but the reverse of this, that the same elements in the same composition will lead you to the same compound, is wrong, because it can give you two different compounds for the same ratio. And why about a case like this? These are isomers. Later on you will see they are going to be called isomers. Why a case like this? I might have told you about C2H2, C4H4 and C6H6. Hey, this is acetylene and this is benzene. Acetylene and benzene. All of you understand that the carbon is to hydrogen ratio would be the same in both of them. Yes or no? The ratio of carbon and hydrogen is going to be the same in both of them. So the same molecule will have the same composition irrespective of its source, but the same composition cannot always give you the same molecule. All of you are comfortable till now? All of you could understand things? Moving on, the law of multiple proportions. Law of, I can rub this? Law of multiple proportions.